Good afternoon and good morning to you guys in Europe. So first, I'd like to thank the speakers for their wonderful presentations. And also, I'd like to thank the audience who are participating in this event. Actually, this is the last session of this event. So I hope you enjoy the event until when it ends. My name is Jin Hwan Kim from KAIST, the Korea Domestic Institute of Science and Technology. And it's my pleasure to be here, and also it's my honor to moderate this session. And before we get started, so let me briefly introduce our panels. Introduce the panels who are far away from here in Europe. The first, the Mr. Onurf Jan Rosas, so who gave the first presentation. So he is currently a senior research scientist at SINTEF Oceans in Norway, and general manager in NFOS, Norwegian Forum for Autonomous Ships. And he is actually one of the most well-recognized experts in the autonomous ship research community. So it's been a while, actually. Good to see you again. So, well, if I miss anything, maybe you can add to the introduction. Also, you can say hi to the audience and speakers here, and maybe it would be nice if you can talk a little bit more about what's going on in Norway, so regarding autonomous ships.
Thank you. I don't think I will use a lot of the time extending on the presentation, but thank you very much to everyone listening in and helping in this big issue of maritime autonomous surface ships and trying to make it a reality. I really appreciate the cooperation with Korea, and I'm looking forward to extending that in the future. So for the time being, let that be my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Actually four speakers. So Mr. Henrik Tunfors, a senior maritime advisor at the Swedish Transport Agency, and he has been served as the chair of the IMO's working group on MAS, maritime autonomous surface ships. And in the last presentation, actually, he showed the result from the activities of the working group. So actually, it was done by his leadership. I really thank you for your hard work. And if you want to say hi, you can say to the speakers in the audience here. Also, it would be nice if you can share any activities in Sweden, especially. You haven't talked about that.
Yes, thank you, and thank you again for having me. And yes, as you say, I'm a bit more from the administrative side of this big issue of MAS. So I'm trying to facilitate the legal foundation for MAS operations, and being a legal advisor, that's for me, it's a thrilling task. I know I might be a bit on my own there, but that's still a key aspect to making possible MAS operations. And that's all from the global side, and that's also from the more regional, as Onurf mentioned. Until we have a legal regime globally, whether that's mandatory or non-mandatory, we need to have, it's going to be national or bilateral agreements taking this forward. So, and that's where we have, as mentioned by Onurf, there's a lot happening that I know of in Scandinavia and Finland, and also on the continental of Sweden, of Europe, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. That's where we have the most activity today. And actually the inland waterways of Europe are very interesting in this regard, because there's a very sound infrastructure for communications, etc., radar, all sorts of transponders available. So I think that's why we have a lot of activity there. Going back to your question though, and I'm not trying to avoid the question, but Swedish activities, on the technical development side, we have a big company with activity in Sweden. That's the ABB, but there are not a lot of Swedish projects, flagship projects like Yara Birkeland or ASCO in Norway, for example. it's mainly smaller robotics companies like Saab, the defense industry proponent, and such actors in Sweden. What we do from the administrative side, and this is very, very interesting, and I'm very delighted that we have a policy lab that's looking into on certain cases. So it's not a government survey where you look into the whole range of mass. We look into specific cases where we try to find the legal barriers in a project form between us, the administration, and of course industry being involved, trying to be creative and finding all the possible legal solutions we have today, but also identifying the gaps when it comes to their operations. And that's a very interesting project. And I know the UK had MAR Labs a couple of years back, and we're trying to follow in their footsteps when it comes to being creative without a sound legal basis for mass today. But we're doing what we can. So that's basically what's going on in Sweden when it comes to regulations.
Okay, thank you for sharing the story. I hope we can share more about kind of local activities next time. And then I'll introduce the speakers here, the Koreans from Korean side. The Mr. Do-hyung Lee is currently the CEO of Avicus. Avicus was spun off from Hyundai Heavy Industry. As you know, Hyundai Heavy Industry is the world's biggest shipbuilding company. And maybe I ask you to introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Im Do-hyung, CEO of Hyundai Heavy Industry Group, Avicus. Mass regulations have not been developed yet, so you may wonder why we are still working on mass technologies. But all of a sudden, the mass-related technologies and services will be on high demand in the near future. So to prepare for that future, we are working on mass technologies, and we are trying to enhance the level of autonomy in our business. Actually, this year, we started this business all year this year, and we won 70 orders for our products up until now, including control solution. We are working on and carrying out 4 different projects. So I think we can expect the Mars age will come faster than we expect, sooner than we expect. So we will see more autonomy and autonomous systems in the shipping industry. It is nice meeting you.
And then I introduce Dr. Hyunjo Kim,
감사합니다. 이제 김현조 박사님을 소개해드리도록 하겠습니다.
Samsung Ship Model Basin, which is the major research center and facilities for Samsung Heavy Industry. So, Hyunjo, can you introduce yourself?
Nice to meet you all. For the past 5 years, we have been developing smart ships, and looking back on the past 5 years, actually 5 years is a short time, but there were a lot of changes. At first, we had no requirements specifically made from the ship owners, but now ship owners are requiring that we have to naturally install the smart digital platform on the ship. And as Mr. Henrik Tonfor said, he said the roadmap is to be completed by 2025, but I think it should be done earlier than 2025. It's difficult to expect what will happen in the next 10 years. And I hope that at IMO, things will be proceeded more quickly. That's my wish. And in the meantime, a lot of technologies will be developed and advanced.
Thank you for the introduction. And finally, the last panel member here, we have a very special guest member, Professor Young-woo Chun from Korea Maritime and Ocean University. He is an expert in maritime education and training. So, Professor Chun, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Thank you for the very comprehensive and concise and informative presentations. I am so pleased to participate in this meaningful last but not least session. I have been actually making a lot of research in seafarers issues in Korea, and also I have been participating IMO and IRO meetings since 1990s. I hope that I could contribute to today's discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then let's get started. For these panel discussions, I'm going to bring up the one issue from each presentation and ask your thoughts on that, so each and every one of you. So also after that, if time allows, maybe we can discuss a few more the general issues regarding the future of autonomous ships. My first question goes to the owner. In your presentation, you said that the autonomous ship is a very expensive technology. It costs a lot. So to reduce the cost, you suggested and recommended to collaborate. So I completely agree with that. But just technology is not here yet, and also the companies are competing. For example, especially in Korea, it's here we have the panel members from Samsung and Hyundai, but they don't collaborate. So it just, how can we make this happen? So it just, there are many stakeholders and players, but they are competing each other. How can make them to collaborate to provide some standard or to reduce the development cost?
A good question. First, I think it's important to say that we are already cooperating, both in IMO with this regulatory development process that is ongoing there. It's actually a cooperative effort between all the member states in IMO. And we are also working on standards in digitalization and in also towards mass in ISO and IC and other organizations. So that there is already something going on. But I think it might be useful to try perhaps make a roadmap to determine what issues are the most burning, so to speak. And I would say that what we see from experience here in Norway is that test criteria, interaction between human and automation, to what degree are you automating the process? What is the role of the remote control center operator? What is the role of the automation system? These are some of the things that we are still struggling with. We also have some, as was mentioned by the last panel member, this human factor issue. When we start to automate processes, there's less and less to do with the human. And that will be a problem, I think, for at least it puts some very important restrictions on how we can make a useful interface between automation and the remaining operators. So there's a lot of things we need to work on. Maybe a roadmap would be useful. And perhaps I think the easiest is perhaps to work bilaterally in projects, if you can do that, and through the standards organizations, and of course in IMO.
Okay, thank you. So, so you actually, the representing the NFAS, right? It's a Norwegian Forum for Autonomous Ship. It can be a pretty good model to benchmark, possibly. So, what about your? Can you tell a little bit more about your experience with that? Also, how can it be extended internationally? Is there any way to do that? What do you think about that?
Norway is a small country. We are about 5 million people. And the maritime sector is, I think it's the second largest export industry after oil and gas, and just before aquaculture and fishing. So we have a long tradition in Norway for cooperation in the maritime sector. there's a very tight connection between the regulators, the ship owners, operators, equipment manufacturers, yards, and so on. So the climate, at least in Norway, is quite good for cooperation. How to extend that to the international community, that is a bit more tricky because the culture varies quite a bit between countries. So NFAS in Norway works very well as a kind of mechanism for people to talk together, to do some collective specification work, guidelines, stuff like that. And it's also a very important meeting place for regulators, the flag state and the coastal state administration, and the industry. We have worked with what we call the International Network for Autonomous Ship, INAS, and we have a fairly good cooperation with certain organizations, for instance, in Korea. And that could also be extended, I think. But there's a lot of cultural issues that we have to see how to solve. So either bilateral, or it could also be interesting to start a kind of international network. Again, maritime is a very small sector. So it's not that difficult, I think, actually, to talk together, also on an international level. If you go to the big exhibitions, you tend to meet a lot of the same people.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your experience. And then I'd like to ask a question to the panelists here. So maybe Dr. Kim. So what do you think about the idea of this collaboration and standardizations? So how can we work together here, for example? Dr. Kim. Oh, yeah.
As for collaboration, in my opinion, it is natural that companies compete each other in terms of technology development, and competition will lead to better quality products. And as you saw from my presentation and from the presentation of Hyundai Heavy Industry, you might have seen the competitive relationship between Samsung and Hyundai. But as I wanted to say this in my presentation, that each player and stakeholder in the sector must cooperate with each other. For example, we cooperated with Mokpo National Maritime University when we verified the performance of the smart digital platform by using the training ship of that university. We cooperate with the university and we gather together with the experts in the area of ship navigation and operation and verify the performance of our system. And then we analyze the outcome of the test. That could be a good example of collaboration. And all smart ship solutions that we developed were created through the collaboration, through the joint collaboration projects with various stakeholders, including ship owners. And in the mass sector, technologies have been developed very quickly. So I don't think the standardization can come before products or technologies are fully developed. In the case of ISO 198428, the standard was announced, and we are currently developing products and technologies according to the available ISO standard. But I understand that standardization cannot come before products or technologies are all fully developed. But I agree that we all need to cooperate with each other for standardization.
The same questions go to Mr. Lim.
My company won a project with a budget of 160 billion won. We are working with the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries in South Korea. And under the project, we are working on how we prepare for the new regulations regarding Mars. And we are also working with a large shipping companies in Korea. And we are planning an ocean-going navigation in the near future? Through which processes or which procedures do we have to test our products? It's not clear yet because there are no standards and regulations yet in place. So if international organizations or research organizations in Korea, if they can give us a guidance or guide, it will be very appreciated. And substantiation projects, my company is more interested in such projects. My company wants to share experiences of shipyards. So that's my suggestion.
Okay, so Professor Chan, do you have anything to add on this?
Well, thank you, Chair. Mr. Roth said, actually you emphasized the importance of the standardization and international collaboration. I do share the same sentiment. It is very, very important to achieve cost efficiency in the development of mass. I'm not a technical person, but I do have one inquiry from you that I understand that you have a very strong, perhaps you said in some of the previous presentation, Norway has a complete maritime cluster, which I think is very, very important element for the success of digital transformation in maritime sector as a whole. I would like you to share Norwegian experience regarding maritime cluster, when and how you have made it and how useful it is for digitalization era. Thank you.
You want me to answer immediately? I'm not an expert on this. I think one of the key things in Norway is that it's a relatively small nation. And we tend to, even in Norway, the maritime area is a relatively small number of people working in it. And we meet the same people and they move between the countries. So I think to a large extent, it's a cultural thing. A small country, quite concentrated area, and we as you say, it's a cluster with active participation of government agencies, ship owners, and so on and so forth. So it's a very special area. I'm not sure why we don't see it in other areas actually, but for us it's a really big help. As I say in Norway, we compete or we cooperate when we must, and we compete when we see the benefit in it. But cooperation is really very important to kind of get away with the small obstacles that are typically very expensive. One example we are seeing here in Norway is, for instance, what you could call a body of evidence for mass to be safe. What kind of documentation do you require? And what kind of documentation is sufficient for the flag state authorities to approve this for operation? We are currently using this 1455 alternative arrangement as basis for the guidelines in Norway, but it doesn't say a lot about how you document it. And this is something that everybody has to solve by themselves unless we cooperate and find a kind of common solution. And then we have to evolve it, of course. So, sorry, I don't really have a good answer.
Okay, thanks. Instead of asking for answers to this question, maybe we can smoothly move over to the next question for Mr. Tan first. So you share the results from the regular scoping exercise activity by IMO, and it can be actually good, the organization platform collaborations and standardizations already. So you briefly mentioned what's coming and what's next. And you showed the road, you talked about roadmap and things like that. But I'm not quite familiar with this kind of activities in IMU. So it's, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? So it's what's typically after this regular scoping exercise? So it's what's the next process?
Yes, certainly. So what we are, the IMO is member state driven. So the IMO won't do anything unless the member states submit proposals. The IMO secretariat is a couple of hundred persons dealing with all of the global maritime legislations. So they don't have the capacity to do this on their own. So that's why member states are active, or they need to be active. Member states are setting the priority through different steering documents. And what we have done now, we finalized, as you said, the scoping exercise, and the result has been processed at one meeting. And member states such as Norway, Japan, Korea, many member states, Singapore, China, have been very active now, submitting proposals on their preferred way forward. So I think I mentioned we have one team going for a mandatory instrument first. We have the non-mandatory instrument team, and we have in the middle sort of the states looking more for a strategic developing a strategy first. So and that's why we decided that we need to, or me and the chair of the whole committee, together with the submitters I just mentioned, the different member states, we need to sit down and sort of agree on a consensus. And the IMO is all about consensus. There are very seldomly that we have votes. It's only for the council elections that are upcoming. So we need to have consensus on the way forward. And that's what we are doing now with this roadmap. And I just want to say to Mr. Kim, I think it was, the roadmap is not going to be produced until 2025. It's the actual code that we will produce between now and 2025. But I actually also I said that was very optimistic because we need to involve many parts of the organization, and maybe even the big UN office for the law of the sea, depending on how we interpret the UNCLOS. That, I mean, the constitution for everything we do legally with regard to the sea. So. But that's I'm wandering astray here. That's off topic. But the IMO, we need agenda items, and that's what we have gotten now. And what we have to agree in this roadmap is how do we digest this elephant or mammoth of a topic, because. We need to consider the common gaps and themes that I mentioned, and we need to consider them in liaison with other committees at the IMO. So we have the same opinion on the role of the master, on the role of the remote operator from a legal standpoint. We need to agree on how do we regulate this goal-based? Do we mean goal-based, or is it maybe more functional-based we mean? So we need to have discussions on all these central paramount topics before we can actually put text on the paper and produce the regulations we need. So this is, if I'm talking meetings, we hope to agree on this roadmap next meeting, and we hope also to agree on what instruments, what conventions we want to amend. SOLAS, load lines, colregs. Do we need to go into STCW now? We have other less central conventions we need to consider as well. So, and this is something we will do in April next year. And continuing also, I think in maybe November, there is a meeting also in the fall of 2022. So hopefully next year we have a foundation that we can build upon and continue working on in 2023, where we actually develop regulations for design, construction, equipment, navigation, loading, unloading, or whatever we feel that is necessary to regulate. So yeah, I hope that sheds some light on the process. But it's member state driven. You, me, everyone needs to be active and also collaborate. So I think that's a very good point. Everything that happens bilaterally, multilaterally, industry, because industry, of course, is a driver. Industry pushes member states, administrations to take action. And that's also why it's very important that industry has channels into governments so that the governments can act more swiftly and put priority on this. In my country, for example, I'll finish soon, we have the automotive industry being the big industry, Volvo, etc. They're the driver for autonomy in Sweden. But we also look at what they do in the automotive industry when we plan for our activities in the maritime industry, of course, because they're further ahead, both legally and I think also when it comes to the technology. So that's also a collaboration I wanna advocate for here. And of course, Hyundai is also an automotive producer, and so there are ties. I think the technology is the same, and also think that the legal obstacles are similar to our industries.
Okay, thank you. So we are actually running out of time, so I think we move over to the next questions. My next question is the findings from Dr. Kim's presentation. You said we are not quite ready to deal with autonomy at this point. So you suggested we need to focus on something that can reduce the workload of the sailors, maybe mainly some kind of bookkeeping or just reporting, automated reporting and things like that. But in other words, what cannot be digitalized at this moment will be the major obstacles and hurdles or challenges toward the autonomous ships. What are they and how can you deal with that? So what are the major challenges and obstacles toward the autonomous? Because you said that it's too early, right, to talk about autonomous at this point.
I would say there are too many obstacles to say. So 저희가 이제
As you saw from my presentation, we are preparing for the era of MAS, and we have been developing automatic collision avoidance system. And just like ARA project in Norway, we don't have the project dedicated to unmanned vessel. So we are faced with a lot of challenges in our efforts towards MAS. There are a lot of equipments to be on board the MAS vessel, and we are lack of knowledge and skills regarding how are we going to monitor the equipments on board the MAS. And when we have an unskilled personnel in the onshore station or system, it will be difficult for that person to monitor the equipments of MAS. And as for remote operation, we have uncertainty over whether the technologies or platforms applied to the MAS will be really properly working. But in order to reduce the gap between digitalization and full autonomy, we need to develop and advance several technologies and solutions. Firstly, we need to think about how we can reduce the workloads of crew. That will lead to the lower number of crews, and we will be able to gradually achieve the full autonomy. So we have the system to help crews use tablet to do the documentation work without any paper, and we attach sensor to the equipment on board so that we can receive data from the sensors to monitor the status of the equipment on board. If such technology is penetrated to the industry wider, then that will reduce the workloads
I
of
think I better ask
the
a question
crew.
to Mr. Liu about the navigation assistance system. So you developed the system basically for large ocean-going vessels, but you talked about your plan to extend this application to a small vessel, leisure boat, and things like that. But they are so different. The size is different, the market is different. So what kind of different technology do you think you need, and also what's your strategies so to tackling the markets and the challenges?
For large vessels, as you know, 80% of the accident involving large vessels come from human errors. So we are suffering from lack of crew, and more than 50% of the seafarers currently in Korea are over 50 years old. So we are trying to develop more safety service or products because we have to prepare for the reduced number of seafarers in the future. So we are trying to launch products for automation that can be used as shipyards and ports. In the engine room, there are about 500 equipments. So if we have a willingness, we can develop the proper technologies. If you go to an offshore plant, you will see the plant is getting more and more automated. So automation is here to stay. It will be here to stay. So we'll continue to develop automation products. And we have a different strategy for leisure boats. And those who own leisure boats, they operate those boats like only a couple of hours a year, but they don't have the required expertise or skills. So they can navigate the sea as much as they want. So we want to help them. So we want to help them enjoy the leisure boats more. So we had some people complaining about the difficulty of docking. So our products, I believe, can help them.
Okay, because of the time, I think it's time to ask the last question. My last questions go to Professor Chun. So autonomous ships requires the officers and sailors who have different skills and different capabilities and training. So you are working for the training institutions like Korea Maritime University, Korea Maritime and Ocean University. And so what kind of preparation is going on in the education institution? And do you think it will affect the STCW convention? It's actually Mr. Tunford has briefly mentioned about that. So can you talk about that?
예, 지금부터 이제 한국말로 하겠습니다.
I'll speak in Korean.
시간이 좀 짧은 것 같아서
Actually, the time is short, so I would like to make my comment short. First, Korea Maritime University is the world-leading maritime university in the world. Recently, we are trying to establish a new education course titled Division of Maritime AI and Cybersecurity. This division will be opened from next year. We have two majors. One is Maritime AI and the other major is Cybersecurity. So we are taking proactive measures to open these education courses. We have analyzed and diagnosed the current status in the industry, and we prepared a draft curriculum plan, but we still need to make some improvement. In this regard, we need R&D activities on education of students. First of all, we need education that is tailored to the new era. We call this smart officer. We need to create curriculum to foster smart officers. And in order to provide education for crew and seafarers, we need to develop new equipment. So we need to pilot operate such educational courses for smart officers and crews. And then we need to propose and achieve international standardization of the education in preparation for the era of mass. And so we need to provide education for students to become smart talents. So we have been studying this curriculum for about 5 years. And according to the RSC adopted by IMO, we are going to make some proposal regarding the education of
because of the limited
students.
time, we have to close the sessions. And I'd like to thank all the speakers, especially the speakers from abroad. And also I'd like to thank Professor Chan for your valuable the thoughts on this. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you, the audience. And thank you again. Thank you.